Welcome back to Political Soulfuls, April 17th, Wednesday, 2019. Yep, we have a few months to go until the political arena gets crazy for the 2020 presidential elections. And I want to talk about something that's pertinent to the 2020 elections, and that is MAGA. Specifically, our topic is what Martin Luther King Jr. would say about MAGA. That's what we're getting in today. That's the question. What Martin Luther King Jr. would say about MAGA. I think he would have a lot to say about MAGA. However, I'm going to draw from one of his texts here called Stride Toward Freedom, the Montgomery story, published in 1958. He makes some comments here that I think we should remind ourselves of if we read it before and forgot, or if you never read this book, then I think you might want to check it out. So I want to say what's up to everybody here. We got Ibrahim in the house. We got Samuel in the house. We got JD Stokes in the house. Good evening. Good show last night. Yo, the show was fire. Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Samuel said, I don't think we have enough time for that. That's a good one. Absolutely. LOL. Absolutely. Martin Luther King Jr. will have a mouthful to say about MAGA. And so what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about what he would say. And I'm going to draw from one of his texts called Stride Toward Freedom, the Montgomery story. All right, it's a book that tells a story of the Montgomery drama. And also in this book, what's good is he lays out his nonviolence initiative and what it means. A lot of people thought that, and still do think, that Martin Luther King Jr.'s nonviolence strategy was a reflection of his fear, but it wasn't at all. It was a calculated decision in order to break through the bastions of white supremacy in the 50s and 60s, and to do so in a way that will have real results. And he warned people, if you think that this is something that will avoid violence, then you are mistaken. You're mistaken, because people will get hurt doing this. There's a sacrifice. It's a real threat. And so I don't want to get into that right now, but this is one of the books where he fleshes that out. And it's unfortunate that people only take the messages from clips of his speeches or the I Have a Dream speech. And it's sometimes very sad to see many African Americans or minorities critique Martin Luther King Jr. from just a cursory or shallow reading of his words. So the name of the book, rename that book again. The name of the book is Stride Toward Freedom, the Montgomery story. You can get it on Amazon as a Kindle book. I can send you a link. You can order the book used. They have some good copies. So Samuel said the most dangerous things in the world are conscientious stupidity and sincere ignorance. Wow. Yes. So let's see. So there's a passage here in this book that I want to pull out some things. And I'm going to make a few points. And then we'll call it a night. So the first thing is, there's a debate now, and it's unfortunate that we're having this debate, whether racism is the number one problem, or is it the economy or capitalism. And so I won't enter that debate right now. But what I would say is, let's see what Martin Luther King says in this particular context. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was very much aware of the exploitations of capitalism, but he seems to direct his fundamental concern and his energies towards racism. And for him, racism was so central in the world politics that it was not only a problem in the United States. For him, it was also a problem throughout the world. He saw it as a problem in the same way that Du Bois saw the problem, as basically the number one issue in the 21st century. And Du Bois called it the color line. And so let me just read a passage here from MLK's book, Stride Toward Freedom. He says, "This determination of Negro Americans to win freedom from all forms of oppression springs from the same deep longing that motivates oppressed peoples all over the world. The rumblings of discontent in Asia and Africa are expressions of a quest for freedom and human dignity by people who have long been the victims of colonialism and imperialism. So in a real sense, the racial crisis in America is a part of the larger world crisis." All right, that's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he's simply reiterating Du Bois's color line issue. Okay, that's really a reiteration of the color line. And let me bring up the exact quote here in the color line for you. It goes, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, the relation of the darker to the lighter races of men in Asia and Africa and America and the islands of the sea." Okay, that's Du Bois. Here is King, nearly 50 years later, saying pretty much the same thing, that the rumblings of discontent in Asia and Africa are expressions of a quest for freedom and human dignity by the people who have long been the victims of colonialism and imperialism. So in a real sense, the racial crisis in America is a part of the larger world crisis. I wanted to reiterate that. That's important because King is letting us know at least a fundamental concern for him that is widespread, not just in America, but also throughout the world. So, how does this speak to MAGA? Well, right now in this book, King was trying to explain why there was a serious backlash to the civil rights movement. Why is there a crisis in the first place, and why is there a backlash? Shouldn't Americans want to see democracy shared by everyone? Shouldn't Americans want to see democracy healthy and seeing its principles fulfilled? Well, that wasn't the case. There was a lot of pushback. And so the pushback for King, in his words, was an emerging new order. This new order was not some insidious, imperialist, fascist movement coming to rob American citizens of their private rights. No. He says, these are King's words, "The crisis developed when the collective pressures to achieve fair goals for the Negro met with tenacious and determined resistance. Then the emerging new order, based on the principle of democratic equalitarianism, came face to face with the older order, based on the principles of paternalism and subordination." Okay, so basically, the civil rights movement, all the marches, the boycotts, were threats to people who wanted to maintain white supremacy. They wanted to keep minorities in second-class citizenship. That's what they wanted to do. And this was, for many people, a crisis. They spoke of this as a crisis. But the crisis, King is trying to remind people in his day, it's not something caused by those who are seeking rightfully their freedom, but for the fact that people are seeking freedom in a country that profess to nurture freedom and democracy. So this is the crisis. And the crisis emerged. It became much more evident as, and I love how he says this, the collective pressures to achieve fair goals for the Negro. And I want to jump ship real fast. So there's a great book that I have called The New Black. And I like this, The New Black, because it talks about, the title of the book is using black as the term new black to represent sort of the multicultural constituency that voted for Barack Obama, giving, it's alluding to the civil rights movement and all that the civil rights movement stood for. And so the new black was, so this new American majority that voted in 2008, 2012, and made a huge statement in electoral politics and also in the history of in America's demographic history. This new emerging electorate came forth as a collective pressure to achieve fair goals, to achieve fair citizenship, basic citizenship, and the privileges and the rights that comes along with American citizenship. And this was a threat. This was a threat then, during King's Day, and now during our day. And all it was, the votes for Obama, the votes against McCain and Romney, and the votes against Trump were basically the same in a sense that people, as one book like to call them, the new black, are fighting for the kinds of rights that the civil rights movement and that blacks have always fought for. One of the things I try to remind myself of is that if you look at the fight for freedom among African Americans in this country, you will find out what is wrong in America. Okay? If you look at what minorities are fighting for, then you will see what America needs to work on. And this is why the civil rights movement was beneficial for all minorities, not just racial minorities, but also social groups, even the LGBT community, the LGBTQ community, the women's rights, the handicap. Okay, all of these different groups benefited from the civil rights movement. Unfortunately, you have a lot of us saying, oh, they just got along with the civil rights movement just for themselves. Well, that's what the civil rights movement was for. In a sense, it was a sort of panacea because it was challenging. It was challenging America's original sin of slavery, which begat racism and which perpetuated paternalism, patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, and all of these norms that are basically minions of inequality. And so what we have here in King's Day is an example, and I wouldn't say a complete repetition in our day, but what we see in King's Day, a theme that is very relevant to us. Why? Because today there is a pushback to a lot of things that happened in Obama's presidency. And that pushback has come in the form of MAGA. And so let's look at what King says about the pushback or the resistance to what he calls a new order. And for him, it's not really a new order. For him, really what it is simply an effort to help America live up to its ideals. In fact, let me just take King's words here. He says, the crisis developed paradoxically when the most sublime principles of American democracy, imperfectly realized for almost 2 centuries, began fulfilling themselves and met with the brutal resistance of forces seeking to contract and repress freedom's growth. Okay, so he's basically saying the new order, which would be new in the sense that the status quo, the old order, is being threatened. The old order, obviously, as we all know, is one that wants to maintain patriarchy, racism, economic inequality, and a heterosexual norm, and a scale of being where certain groups of people, for whatever reason, are inherently better than others. Okay, so let's see how King describes this resistance. He says the resistance to the emergence of the new order expresses itself in the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan. So the Ku Klux Klan, which was born right after the Civil War. Okay, there was no need for the Ku Klux Klan when slavery reigned. There was no need for it. It was a response to Ku Klux Klan and other white nationalist organizations grew out of a response to save the Old South, to save the Confederacy, or at least preserve as much of its memory and social and cultural norms as possible. And there's been ups and downs over the years from 1865 all the way to 1965. But right around the 50s, the Ku Klux Klan renewed itself. Why? Because there was a lot of headway made by those who were just sick and tired of Jim Crow and who have begun to make a lot of progress. Now, King is talking about this resistance to this collective pressure against white supremacy. In fact, he says, is determined to preserve segregation at any cost, this organization employs methods that are crude and primitive. Now, here's the deal. Many people would like to say MAGA, well, MAGA is different from the Ku Klux Klan. Let's give them that because King has something for them as well. All right, if you want to distinguish yourselves from the Ku Klux Klan, but vote in the same way as Ku Klux Klan members do, right, and not see a problem with that, what King goes on to say, there were what were called white citizens councils, and they were occasionally, they would occasionally work with members of the Ku Klux Klan, but they were on a higher social economic ladder, and they would not be as vulgar as the KKK, and so they would like to dress themselves as, citizens who do not agree with, outward, performances of violence, but all along they are supporting racism. Okay. Now, the problem is, as we can see, is that those who would try to distinguish themselves from the KKK were still aiding and abetting Jim Crow. They were aiding and abetting racism, even if they weren't actually putting on hoodies, white hoodies, and burning crosses and lynching people. But they were very much voting for oppressive measures. They were very much okay with police coming out with their dogs. They were cool with all that. They were cool with all that. And this is what we see with a lot of people who support MAGA today. At least those who try to distinguish themselves from the neo-Nazis and white nationalism and the white nationalists. Those who, so-called good citizens, who say, well, no, I'm not a racist just because I support MAGA, still vote 100% in the same way that white nationalists and the KKK and neo-Nazis do. So King would say that MAGA essentially is a resistance to and I like how King would put it, the sublime principles of American democracy. MAGA, listen to what Trump tries to tell us. Make America great again. Back to the old order. That's the key. And this is what King was reminding his contemporaries, to understand the motivation of the resistance. If we don't, we would end up feeling guilty. We would end up thinking that we're doing something wrong, especially when, here's what's really interesting. I hear a lot of people on the right blaming the left for what they want to call it, political correctness. Meanwhile, MAGA is a euphemism for racism. It's euphemism for white supremacy and white nationalism. And symbolically, it represents a resistance to racial equality, and translating out of that, economic equality. So King, I believe, and you read for yourself, will see MAGA as a resistance to this change. Think about this. The vehemence of those who support MAGA, the impatience of those who support MAGA, the irritability, the anger, the hatred of those who support MAGA comes from what I see for them, a crisis in their country. They are seeing a crisis in their country. So much so, on one clip I have, Trump saying, we're going to take our country back. Now, there wasn't an invasion. North Korea did not invade America. Russia did not invade America. So who are they taking their country back from exactly? I mean, wow, these are some really, really hard words. I mean, imagine I came here and said to y'all, listen, I can't do a podcast tomorrow because I'm busy taking my apartment back. Like, taking it back, like, what happened? Who came in and took your apartment and took over your apartment? Like, what's going on? That's a crisis indeed. So, what we see here is that much has changed, even though there's so much more for us to change. There's so much more for us to improve. We have to keep in mind that so much has changed, that that change has tapped the hatred inside many people who are willing to elect someone who knows nothing about the job, but whose simple message is, I'm going to make sure I make things the way they used to be. This should be alarming, to say the least, but more importantly, this should be enlightening, so that we understand what we're dealing with, so that we are always ready to get out there and vote, and to encourage our brothers and sisters to do the same, and to be the best that they can be in their lives. Right? This should be motivation for us. This should be motivation for us. If King right now were around, he would be on the front lines resisting against MAGA. This is important. Now, here's something that, let me bring out something else that King says that I think that is very insightful. Let me just, you know what, if I got time, I'm just going to go through some of this text here. I'm not going to read everything word for word, but here's another important statement here by King. He says, as in other social crises, the defenders of the status quo in the South argue that they were gradually solving their own problems until external pressure was brought to bear upon them. And this notion of external pressure, right, the blame game, in fact, is really interesting here. one way to tap the vitriol of conservatives is to say, hey, America is not great now because of those folk over there. America is not great right now because of immigrants. All immigrants. America, all immigrants, from certain places. Let's get that correct. America is not great because of those liberals. Or America is not great because of those Muslims. Or LGBTQ community. Or people who are just feeding off of handouts. People who are a burden to the taxpayer dollars. Not realizing that perhaps America is struggling because many Americans refuse to allow other Americans to actually participate fully in this country and be of service. Can you think about, try to imagine how great America could have been if it opened up the doors for all of the second-class citizens it restrained all these years. But instead, because of its greed, it was willing to sabotage its own success just to make sure another group of people are not equal. So the blame game, people who want to defend the status quo are not looking within, not reflecting on their own issues, not reflecting on their hypocrisy, as Malcolm X reminds us that American democracy isn't a hypocrisy, because, and as King would confirm, it's not living up to, people not living up to the ideals of American democracy. Yeah, I can tout, I wouldn't mind touting and bragging about the ideals of American democracy, but American democracy as it's practiced here is a problem. And that's why America is not great. In fact, America began to become great in 2008. So that's something to keep in mind. King continues, during a crisis period, a desperate attempt is made by the extremists to influence the minds of the liberal forces and the ruling majority. Okay, so for example, in the present transition, white Southerners attempt to convince Northern whites that the Negroes are inherently criminal. And we see this to this day. Basically, what they do is to try to gather more support. They point a finger and say, look at these groups. They're inherently criminal. King, your boy Donald Trump did that. Basically said that Mexicans are rapists. That's the impression he painted. And he does it he does the same thing to Muslims. And that's what America does. In particular, I would say that's what conservative Americans do. All right, so what we're seeing now acted on other groups, the LGBTQ group, or immigrants from Latin America, and so on. Those are the same tactics that were applied to African Americans, to blacks, for the last couple of centuries. Same tactics, trying to persuade other white voters, and those tactics are successful. The Southern strategy that Nixon got from Barry Goldwater was so successful that after another great collective push that happened under Lyndon Johnson's presidency happened, after that, this blame game of blacks and whoever else was so successful that no Democratic president won the white vote ever again since then. Not at all. Not even your boy Bill Clinton did not win the white vote since then. No, he didn't. Not even Barack Obama, in both of his terms, did not win the white vote. That's how successful this strategy is, because they're still using it. And King laid it out for us. Martin Luther King laid it out for us. And people are still not getting it. They're pointing at this, pointing at that, pointing at this. And I mean, we have some amazing people who died for the cause, killed, okay, showing us how this is going down. This is real, folk. So it's almost as if, those of you who came into the conversation last night, it was real. When my boy Jones called in and he said that he thinks that Donald Trump is going to win again. And he said it for a very specific reason. Not because conservatives can just outvote us or beat us, on an up and up. Because of leftists, perfectionists, or those who are very much unaware of the scenario. That's right, Murphy, yes. And I've been saying this time and time again about that. Time and time again. And I'm really happy there's others who are really seeing this. So as I go over what King is saying, who more than anyone we know in this country fully believe in the power of our collective efforts, who created that platform, who created that strategy that Barack Obama would employ, he's telling us the kinds of tactics that will come in response to that. And we didn't see it in 2016. So I think that this is fitting for us to hear and be reminded of what King is trying to tell us so that we can learn from that mistake. Right? So that we can learn that when you make, King says, oh man, so much that King says is flooding my mind. He gives a great description of progress. That is not necessarily a straight line. It could be curvy. Okay, sometimes you get close and you have to wind around, or you get to it and you have to go from behind. And what he's trying to let us know is that the journey to our destination is not going to be easy. It will come with trials and tribulations, but we have to stay on the path and be prepared for such things. So MAGA is nothing more than this resistance. It's a backlash. The same kind of backlash that King observed in his time and others before King. So Samuel said, so why can't we reproduce and use the same strategies, philosophies to our current situation? I mean, we actually can. The issue is there's a disconnect of the history. A lot of us, our present generation, and I'm not even talking about this young folk. We're disconnected from that wisdom, that accumulated wisdom. I mean, if we look at technology, a lot of people just see new technology as if it just emerged out of thin air, and they love the stories where somebody was so creative that they came up with something that was never done before, not realizing that every single invention was made possible, was greatly helped by previous inventions and ideas. And so we've lost track. We've lost track. I mean, a lot of us, I get my news from social media. I like my New York Times, my Washington Post, and stuff like that. But we also have to read a little bit more deeply in different areas. We have to solidify our history. We have to even understand a little bit better the process of the American government, because a lot of people make conclusions about what's going on without a basic understanding. And I'm not saying that's, people should be active and speak their minds, but there should also be an effort made to be insightful, to know about what's going on as best one can. Right? And so I think so that's what a part of our issue is I said before, I give this example because it's funny, but it's heartbreaking. When I'm in a discussion and somebody is trying to explain to me how politics go, and they gave me a history of American politics by starting off with Bill Clinton's presidency, and they went through, and it was pretty good. I mean, very well described, Clinton's, and then Bush Jr.'s, and then Obama's, and then now we're here, and I'm like thinking like, okay, so now you're gonna make these conclusions, not just I'm not talking about specific conclusions, which I can get, but they're making conclusions about patterns and trends of what's going on in that small sample of history. I'm like, there was somebody before Clinton, and somebody before that person, and somebody before that person. You know that there's been changes in the demographic, which has motivated different strategies and techniques that have opened up opportunities and catalyzed resistance. I say we're dealing with, when we think about MAGA, when a lot of millennials think about MAGA, they're just thinking Donald Trump. Like, okay, Donald Trump came and he gave birth to MAGA. Maybe the word, maybe that acronym, but not the sentiments, not the vitriol, not the patriarchy, not the racism, not the xenophobia. He didn't give birth to those things. He's just giving voice to those things. They've been waiting for their opportunity. In fact, when America has been on the edge way before Barack Obama came, they seen this coming. They seen it coming. They seen it coming before many of us seen it coming. They understood, because the same way, the same folk who tell other people to get over slavery are the same ones who will remember the Alamo, are the same ones who will remember Robert E. Lee. Okay? They know their history. They know the changes. As far as they're concerned, America has failed from grace. Okay? They remember the culture wars. They remember Woodstock, and all these different incidents in their narrative, which attest to a shift from true American principles. So they know this, and we have to know that our fight is going to be harder, it's steeper, it's more tiring, and our progress will be slower. And so when we encounter backlashes such as Trump really, I was getting ready to say that Trump never really should have been president, but I mean, it's, like Jones and I talked about, and I had a discussion or debate a few days ago, and I was telling a friend, was saying, well, we shouldn't look at the past. There's nothing to worry about. Well, we shouldn't look at the past because it's all about right now. Trump won, and that's that. It's over. They just won. And so why are we talking about anything else? I said Trump didn't win overnight. When Obama won in 2008, the right buckled down and won back the House. And the reason why they won the House, because many of us, 65 million of us, showed up in 2008 for the House of Representatives. And we dipped down to, we lost 19 million votes. All right, forget the exact number. And we lost the House because we did not show up. We had a lower voter turnout than the Republicans. They only dropped 7 million. We dropped 19 million. I remember those numbers because they matter to me. The drop mattered to me. And then they caused a lot of confusion among us. They made it seem like, and coming from the left and the right, we're hearing things are never happening, in our favor. Obama was a sellout. All sorts of just bad news, which really should have inspired us to say, okay, we're going to get on our grind and get more representatives in the House. No, we didn't. And then they kept it up and eventually won the Senate in 2014 for the same reason. But this time, there was an extra reason. Not just because of low voter turnout on our parts, but they had enough time to redistrict states. They had enough time to enact voter suppression laws. And when 2014 came in, that sealed the deal with the Senate, and they got a ton of governorships. They had a lead in governorships throughout the country. And by 2016, of course, Trump would win by small numbers in states where there was a surplus of voters for the left. Because one, we didn't show up. Two, many could not get to the polls for various reasons. Three, some people were purged. Some people's names were purged, particularly like in Ohio, which the Supreme Court, which is the right Supreme Court, gave the thumbs up for. So this was incremental. This was not overnight. Okay, this is the resistance that King was trying to warn us about. Okay, and we have to understand this. So this means one thing that we have to do is get out there and vote. And as Samuel said, misinformation, disinformation, paradoxes, and hypocrisies mixed in with half-truths and omnitrances. Did I pronounce that right? So, this absolutely, Samuel, absolutely, there it is right there. That's the truth serum right there, folk. Just read what Samuel just said here, and you got it. You got it. So King, I would say King would tell us that MAGA is a resistance to the potential change that is slowly but surely manifesting itself. That's what he would say. And he would remind us that it would not be the first time. In fact, I think he would say, shame on you. Shame on all of you who try to support me on MLK Day and act all concerned about Black history in February and not have noticed this pattern and not have seen what my generation had gone through. Shame on all of us. Shame on all of us. But it's not over. I think he will inspire us to continue to pick our head ups, to take one step at a time, get back on track, and do it again. Because as I always say before closing out here, as I always say and will continue to say, and maybe this is my optimism, but I think this is rooted in some good empirical evidence that the right is playing defense. That the right know if the left can get itself together, that the right is going to be going right around the corner. Right around that corner. We clearly have a new American majority which comprises minorities across the board. The majority of minorities vote on the left. And I'm not saying they all agree on everything, right? They are primarily progressive, and you have various different religious groups. So you get Asian Americans, you get Latino Americans, you got Black Americans. You go on. Latino Americans, and you have Jews, you have Catholics, you have Protestant, even Protestant Christians. Not that many, but enough. You have Sikhs, Buddhists, you name it, voting on the left. On the right, you have Protestant Christianity, but the majority of those voters are white. So clearly the fault line is race, unfortunately. That's the way it is. People say, oh, you're race baiting and all that stuff. No, I'm just looking at the exit polls. I didn't make the exit polls. I wish we had a majority of white voters, or maybe I wish white voters were evenly split on both parties. I wish we could have two parties that are pushing out, some really good things for us to consider as a whole. But that's not how it is right now. That's not how it is. The majority of white voters do not vote on the left anymore. They stopped. They don't want to. They stopped doing it ever since they called. So when you talk about liberal, just a little bit, the term liberal, right? It was used as a derogative term. Conservative whites, Southern whites would call liberals who supported the civil rights movement and supported racial justice and economic justice, they would call them nigger lovers. That was a way to demonize a white person who was trying to push a liberal policy. That was a way to curtail their career or stop them from getting up by saying, oh, look at that nigger lover right there. Right? That's a word. That's a term. And it was used. Unfortunately, it was used by the right. So yeah, people might want to say, which is true, there are some races on the left, but even they were ostracized just for the little that they were willing to do for the cause. So King again would remind us, this man was killed, and he left behind not only policies that have changed this country, but also words of wisdom that can inspire our minds. Let's feed on this. He left behind political soul food. So MAGA for King would be seen as a resistance to the realization of a true democracy, of true American democracy. King didn't even want to diss American democracy. He said, you know what? I might even... Now, X was like, yo, American democracy is a hypocrisy. Forget about it. And X, he was just straight up about things. But King was like, listen, we're not even going to give them that much credit. Here's American democracy, and here's the ill intentions of people who are greedy, misinformed, gullible, and outright evil. Okay? You have principles, and I appreciate that, because King was able to understand the concepts and ideas. In fact, many conservatives would even fight against the idea of democracy. Some even going as far as say, oh no, America's not a democracy. Well, yes, America is a Republican democracy, but in essence it's based on democratic principles. Now, the very democratic principles they're arguing against, they would want for themselves. They want the privileges of first-class citizenship for themselves, but not see it shared by others. That's the resistance. This is what MAGA is for. MAGA tells us, make America great again. Make America great again. All right? So, when you get a chance, read some King. As Samuel said, we need to pick up where the great Dr. King left off. Absolutely. 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 Especially our present generation. We need to pick up. My boy Jones came on. He gave he shared some of his experience. Says when people were telling him, "Oh, you shouldn't vote," and this is on the left. So I realized that, and I would tell people, I get into these really interesting conversations with people who are, I would think that we share a lot of views, but it turns out that they, in fact, are recommending some self-sabotaging. And I'm like, what? Like, not vote? You kidding me? So, we have some work to do, y'all. We have some work to do, because it's real out here. It's real. I don't know how else to say. I'm going to have to get like Cardi B on y'all. It's real. Enough said. The right is not playing games. They're not playing games. They would love to torch Obamacare. They would love to scrap the Civil Rights Act. They would love to do these things. They've been trying to do these things forever. They're shredding affirmative action. In fact, let me go back a track. They're trying to renovate affirmative action so that it's affirmative action for white people who are more employed than minorities, who get better treatment from all the social services. I mean, like, really? So King, dear King, King says here, I read this last passage here. I'm almost reading this book like it's a book of the Bible. King said here, but it is still not too late to act. Every crisis has both its dangers and opportunities. It can spell either salvation or doom. In the present crisis, America can achieve either racial justice or the ultimate social psychosis that can only lead to domestic suicide. And that's what we're seeing now. Domestic suicide. America, white America, during Jim Crow, would never allow itself to fall behind in the technological trends. It will stay up. Renewable energy, clean energy, solar power, that is the future. That is the now present in many countries. Technology now is being made around new forms of energy. But this America is committing domestic suicide and willing to stay attached to old forms of energy in order to protect its ideology. Right? We are hearing, well, God will tell us when to leave coal. God will tell us when. Now, I ain't trying to knock God right now, but I don't know if God's really telling you that. And this will be the first time God is telling you to slow your roll. I mean, where was God? Wasn't God telling you to go out and multiply, right? And conquer the West, manifest destiny? Wasn't God there then? What happened? Wasn't God telling, our earlier presidents to make the world safe for democracy? To protect these freedoms that people have? To civilize the world? I mean, presidents were actually saying, we're supposed to civilize the world. I mean, that was one of the motivations for the Spanish-American War. So there's some other motivations going on now, because the leveling of the playing field now, in the opening of doors for people of color and others to access, opportunities to be in the workforce is real, and the access to education is real. That people are like, no, we don't want these changes. It's going to shift the wealth. It's going to allow new entrepreneurial ideas to come in. And then you have people who are ready to work and they are not. Right? No, we got a problem with that. We got a problem with that. We got a problem with that. So, again, we're seeing a social psychosis in Trump's presidency. We're seeing it right now. And listen, I'm going to read the rest of this paragraph and call it a night. It's almost as if MLK is alive right now talking about MAGA. In the present crisis, America can achieve either racial justice or the ultimate social psychosis that can only lead to domestic suicide. The democratic ideal of freedom and equality will be fulfilled for all, or all human beings will share in the resulting social and spiritual doom. In short, this crisis has the potential for democracy's fulfillment or fascism's triumph, for social progress or retrogression. We can choose either to walk the high road of human brotherhood or to tread the low road of man's inhumanity to man. I mean, King could have just as easily been a journalist writing this right now in a column for the Washington Post, New York Times, USA Today, The Atlantic. Easily. So, folk, I think you hear where King's coming from here. I need you out there to encourage others. Sony, I'm speaking to kindred spirits. Some say preaching to the choir. But it's important for us to come together like this to encourage each other, to remind each other, to give each other strength, and so we can go out there and do the work we have to do. I see a lot of y'all on social media putting up the posts. We need that. We need that. Okay. So I want y'all to have a great night. To support Political Soul Food, please check out paypal.me/Kassan Henry or patreon.com/Kassan Henry. And it's great to see y'all out here. I'm hopeful. I know some people are not as hopeful as I am, but I see that we have what it takes to win. We have what it takes to win. And we just have to get out there and mobilize. And also, I'm going to tell y'all now, to keep it real, Republicans are raising a lot of money. Now, I know a lot of us want to get money out of politics, but we need money. We need money. The Democratic Party needs some money. Okay? So donate what you can, when you can. All right? And encourage others to do so. I know a lot of people, it gets a little sticky with this, but it's real. So I got to speak up on this issue. I don't care if it's 50 cents or just 99 cents or $1. Do something. You have to do something. And if we have investigations going on with Trump, which I'm very encouraged by, as Jones and I talked about. There are some serious investigations at the federal and state level. And Mueller did his job to pass on a lot of ammunition because he knew there was a set time for his investigation. But he was smart enough to pass on information or cases that deserve to be continued long past his report. And that's what's happening. That's great. We have people on the fort. We have some incoming freshmen who are learning their way, who are out there, taking a risk, sticking their head out there for us. We have Nancy Pelosi up there really in the belly of the beast. All right. And obviously our local politicians is important. And so the donations for what the first donations I was talking about were for supporting this, podcast. The others, what I'm talking about is, find your local politicians or the Democratic Party. You can donate to, you can donate for congressional causes. I think it's DSSS or DCCC. I get that mixed up sometimes. I think it's both actually. Or you can just Google Democratic Party. Okay, but find a way to be active financially as best you can. Don't go overboard or beyond your means. But you have a voice. Raise your voice. You have a mind. Feed your mind. Some political soul food. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'll see y'all tomorrow for our Thursday night shout outs. It was great being here. Y'all got me inspired. I'm going to do some more reading. I just want to share some things that I'm feeding on. So have a great night. And yes, we can. All right. Peace out.